In the heart of the wild frontier, a mysterious outlaw turned reluctant guardian discovers a lone girl, the sole survivor of a brutal ambush, and together, they begin a journey of vengeance, justice, and redemption that will test every scar they carry and reveal a hidden past that could change everything. But just when peace seems within reach, a buried secret resurfaces, threatening to shatter the fragile bond they've built. Can they survive what comes next, or will the ghosts of their pasts finally catch up to them? They say the desert keeps its secrets, buried beneath the dust and sun-bleached bones. But one tale still stirs when the wind howls through the canyons of Arizona territory. It starts with the sound of wagon wheels and ends in the echo of gunfire. And in between, there's a girl, a ghost of a man, and a silence deeper than any grave. The sun was high when the wagon train rolled into the Narrows. 11 wagons, canvas stretched taut over wood, iron-rimmed wheels creaking, and the sharp crack of whips as the oxen strained forward. The travelers rode with hope thick in their lungs, families fleeing back east, seeking land and promise. Among them, a girl named Clara sat beside her mother, her hands clutched around a tin cup of warm water. She was 12, small and wiry, with sunburnt cheeks and a fierce, quiet gaze. Her father rode ahead, one hand on the reins, the other resting near the rifle holstered by his saddle. He didn't like the way the cliffs loomed so close on either side. Too narrow, he muttered to the scout riding beside him. Too quiet. The scout, a lean Cheyenne man with a battered hat and a scar like a claw across his chin, said nothing, but his eyes flicked to the ridgelines. They were being watched. He could feel it like the breath of a snake at his neck. It happened fast, as such things do. The first shot rang out from the rocks, catching the lead ox clean through the eye. The second tore through the scout's shoulder, spinning him from the saddle. Then the canyon lit up, flashes of fire and smoke as the Hawthorne gang descended like carrion crows. They were dust-covered shadows, yelling wild, faces wrapped in rags, rifles barking like thunder. Screams rose. Horses reared. Men grabbed for weapons, some firing blind, some not at all. Clara's father shouted for her to get down, but she couldn't hear him over the roar. The wagon behind them exploded in flame, a lantern shattered by a bullet. Her mother pulled her down beneath the seat, just as their wagon rocked with the force of impact. Bullets ripped through canvas like paper. The smell of gunpowder and burning wood filled the air. Then her mother slumped forward. Clara didn't scream. She couldn't. Her throat seized shut as her mother's blood soaked into her dress. She pushed herself further down, crawling into the narrow space beneath a barrel, heart pounding so loud she swore the outlaws could hear it. She stayed there, motionless, for what felt like hours. The gunfire faded into silence. Then came the laughter, coarse, victorious, cruel. Boots scraped along the gravel, and the sound of wagons being rifled through followed. She heard someone groan, then a single shot. Clean up. Clara stayed frozen. Dust settled on her face. Smoke thickened the air. A fly landed on her hand, and she didn't flinch. When darkness fell and the gang moved on, the only sounds left were the crackle of dying flames and the groan of the dying ox. She crawled out sometime after midnight. The moon turned the carnage silver. Wagons broken like toys. Bodies sprawled, some still twitching. She didn't look for her parents. She didn't have to. She walked away, barefoot, bloody, without direction, into the night. 2 days later, a horse drank from a stream at the edge of the Red Rock Hills. The man leading him crouched nearby, filling a canteen. He was tall, broad-shouldered, though age had bent him slightly at the spine. His beard was gray with streaks of rust, and his coat hung off him like a relic. The rifle strapped to his back had seen better decades. His name was Elias Boone, though no one had called him by that in years. The horse snorted, ears flicking. Boone looked up and saw her, small, dirty, sun-staggered, stumbling toward the water like a ghost. Clara collapsed before she reached the edge. He reached her in 2 strides. She was breathing barely. Lips cracked, skin scorched. He poured a few drops of water into her mouth, careful not to let her choke. She clutched at his wrist, murmuring nonsense. He didn't speak. He wrapped her in his coat, lifted her onto the saddle, and walked the horse toward the nearby alcove he used for shelter. It was nothing more than a shallow cave in the rock, shaded from the worst of the sun, protected from wind. There he set a fire, boiled water, and laid her out on a blanket. She woke at dusk. Her eyes flicked open, wild at first, then narrowed at the unfamiliar man beside her. "You're not one of them," she croaked. "No. You ain't gonna hurt me." "No." She stared at him for a long moment, then closed her eyes again. Boone didn't ask questions. He gave her water, bits of jerky, and silence. She ate like a feral creature, barely pausing to breathe. When she finally spoke again, her voice was flat. "They killed my family. I know. All of them. I know." The fire popped. He didn't press her. He just let her sit, knees pulled to her chest, staring into the flames. "You got a name?" he asked. "Clara. I'm Boone." She nodded once. That night, she didn't sleep. Boone did, but lightly, a hand on the grip of his rifle. The next morning, Clara followed him as he packed his things. She didn't ask where they were going, and he didn't say. But when he mounted the horse and offered her a hand, she took it. They traveled in silence at first. The desert opened around them like a burnt canvas, dry arroyos and sun-split rock, mesquite trees, and the scent of creosote. Boone watched the sky, the tracks, the horizon. He moved with the caution of a man who'd survived by knowing when to shoot and when to disappear. Clara rode behind him, arms around his waist, chin on his shoulder. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But her grip on him was fierce. By the third day, she asked, "Why were you helping me?" Boone didn't answer at once. The wind stirred up a small dust devil in the distance. "Because you were alone," he said. She nodded slowly. That seemed reason enough. They camped near a dry creek bed that night. Boone set snares and lit a low fire. He carved shavings from a stick, his knife flashing in the fading light. Clara watched him. "You know how to kill men." He looked at her, surprised not by the question but the bluntness. "I do." "You one of them?" "I was something once. Don't know what I am now." She considered that. "You gonna find them? The men that did it?" His jaw tightened. "Yes." She didn't smile, just nodded again. They sat in silence as the stars came out, one by one, and the coyotes began to howl. By then, Boone knew the girl wouldn't leave. And Clara knew that whatever Boone had been before, he was hers now. And the men who'd slaughtered her world hadn't just made an orphan. They'd made a witness, a survivor, a reckoning waiting to happen. And the desert, as always, watched. The sun turned the land into a kiln by mid-morning, each step of the horse stirring up plumes of reddish dust that clung to skin and cloth like a second hide. Boone rode in silence, Clara tucked behind him. Her small hands knotted in the coarse fabric of his coat. The trail wasn't really a trail, just a faint suggestion between outcrops, a path he'd used once in another life, long before he'd traded his name for quiet. Clara rarely spoke. When she did, her voice was flat, more observation than conversation. She pointed out animal tracks, the shape of clouds, the occasional buzzard wheel overhead. Boone never asked if she was all right. She wasn't, and he saw no point in asking a question whose answer was written plainly in her hollowed cheeks and wary eyes. They stopped at a dry arroyo just before dusk, the sky bruising purple behind the jagged silhouette of buttes. Boone led the horse into the narrow shade of a crevice and began to make camp. Clara gathered sticks without being asked. She'd taken to survival like someone born to it. Quick hands, sharp eyes, silent feet. "You done this before?" Boone asked, breaking their usual quiet. She shrugged. "Watched Pa set up camp. Didn't get to do much. Ma said it wasn't ladylike." Boone gave a quiet grunt that might have been a chuckle. "Ain't much use for ladylike out here." He lit the fire low and lean, just enough to boil water in a dented tin pot. Clara chewed on dry bread and stared at the embers like she could force the past to burn with them. After they ate, Boone pulled out a piece of cloth and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a revolver, old, scuffed, but clean. He laid it across his knee and checked each chamber with a quiet precision. Clara watched. "You ever shoot?" he asked without looking up. She shook her head. He nodded, like he expected as much, and rewrapped the pistol. That night, The wind howled through the rocks. Boone didn't sleep much. He'd spent too many years listening for danger in the rustle of leaves or the snap of a twig. Clara stirred once, woke with a gasp, then sat staring into the dark for an hour before curling against the saddle and dozing off again. The next morning, Boone studied the tracks near their camp while Clara doused the fire with sand. He crouched low, eyes narrowing. "Horses," he said. "3. Passed through last night." She froze. "Outlaws?" "Don't know. Could be riders. Could be trouble." They broke camp quickly and kept low, avoiding open ground, moving between the long shadows of rock and scrub. The canyon stretched wide, its sandstone walls streaked with centuries of rain and wind, like nature had painted its sorrow in rust. By midday, the horse began to stumble, lips foaming slightly. "She's been pushing hard," Boone muttered. "Needs rest." They stopped under a sandstone overhang, where Boone stripped the saddle and rubbed the horse's flanks with water from his canteen. Clara watched, perched on a flat rock, hugging her knees. Her eyes were always moving now, always alert. "Where we going?" she asked finally. "There's a ranch a few days west. Small one. Quiet. Someone I used to know might still be there. Someone who can help?" "Maybe. Or at least someone who won't ask questions." Clara nodded, as if that were enough. They rode again after the sun dipped, shadows long and forgiving. Boone preferred to move at night, less exposure, fewer eyes. Clara didn't complain. She only asked questions when she needed answers, and she didn't waste breath. "Why do you know how to hide?" she asked. 2 nights later, as they camped in a narrow gulch, Boone looked up from the fire. His face was all plains and weather, the kind of face shaped by sun, wind, and choices made long ago. "Because I spent a lot of years being someone people wanted to find." "Like a criminal?" He didn't flinch. "Like someone who did things he can't take back." She nodded, not judging, just filing the answer away. "You kill men." "Yes. They deserve it. Most of them." Silence again. She didn't speak for the rest of the night. On the 5th day, they found the carcass. It was a horse, half-eaten, ribs gleaming in the sun. The buzzards scattered as Boone approached, rifle at the ready. Clara stood back, eyes narrowed. Boone knelt beside the saddlebag. "Bullet hole in the chest," he muttered. "Not a fall. Someone shot the rider." "Any sign who?" "None. But they left in a hurry." He stood, scanning the rocks. The tension in his shoulders hadn't eased since the 2nd day, but now it tightened like drawn wire. "They're moving ahead of us," he said. "Or circling." He didn't need to say who they were. Clara knew. The Hawthorne gang didn't leave survivors behind. Not willingly. That night, Boone showed her how to hold the revolver. "It's heavier than it looks," he said, placing it gently in her small hands. "Keep your elbows soft. Grip tight, but don't choke it." She tried, the barrel wavering. "Breathe. Aim. Squeeze. Don't jerk it." The shot cracked the silence. The bullet hit wide, nowhere near the rock he'd set up as target. She tried again. Missed again. Boone said nothing, just reset the stance, adjusted her hands, and let her try once more. On the 4th shot, she clipped the edge of the rock. She allowed herself a flicker of pride, but it vanished quickly. "Good," Boone said simply. "We'll keep at it." As dawn stretched pink across the desert, they resumed their journey. Both changed. Clara now carried the revolver in her lap as they rode. Boone's eyes were sharper, scanning ridgelines, anticipating ambush. The land grew harsher. The trail narrowed, hemmed in by steep canyon walls. Boone paused at the entrance of the pass. "This is where they try it," he said softly. "One way in, one way out." Clara tensed behind him. "So we go around?" "No. Too much time lost. But we go careful." They dismounted and led the horse, feet silent on the gravel. Boone moved with the patience of a predator, every step measured. Clara followed, gripping the revolver in both hands. They reached the midpoint of the canyon when Boone stopped abruptly. He crouched low, eyes locked on a scrape in the dust. "Horses. Camped here last night. 3, maybe 4. He pointed to a spent matchstick, still warm to the touch. "Close." Clara's breath hitched, but she steadied it. Boone looked up at the narrow cliffs above. "They're watching," he said. "How do you know?" "Because I would." They didn't run. Boone didn't believe in panic. Instead, he moved faster, guiding Clara with one hand, his rifle in the other. Shadows shifted along the rocks. A glint of metal, then gone. They cleared the canyon with no shots fired. But Boone knew it wasn't over. He didn't tell Clara that. He just pressed onward, the ranch now 2 days away. That night, they camped under a twisted juniper tree, where the firelight flickered against Boone's face, casting long shadows. Clara stared at the flames. "When you find them, what will you do?" Boone didn't answer right away. He was sharpening his knife, long, slow strokes along a whetstone. "What they did, there's only one answer to that," he said at last. Clara nodded. "Good." She lay down with the revolver nestled beside her, like a promise. Boone watched the stars a while longer, listening to the wind. They were close now. He could feel the noose tightening, not around his neck, but around theirs. The ranch sat low in the crook of a valley, a handful of buildings weathered by years of sun and wind. Their wood faded to a silver gray. A split-rail fence lined a patch of hard-bitten earth where 2 horses stood tethered, tails flicking lazily. The only movement came from a woman on the porch, 1 foot propped against the rail, a rifle across her knees, and her eyes trained on the horizon. Boone raised a hand as he and Clara approached. The woman didn't lower the rifle. "Who's a skin?" she called. "Elias Boone," he said. "Looking for shelter and a word." She stood slowly. Her face was creased deep, her hair tied back in a tight braid that showed more white than brown. She studied Boone a long moment, then nodded once and disappeared inside. By the time they reached the steps, the door creaked open again, and she stood aside. Clara hesitated. Boone gave her a small nudge. "It's all right." Inside, the air was cool and dark. A wood stove clicked softly. The woman poured water into a tin cup and handed it to Clara. "I'm Marnie," she said. "Used to know this man back when he could outrun a horse and shoot straight while doing it." Boone offered a faint smile. "Still can do one of those." Marnie's eyes moved to Clara. "She yours?" Boone shook his head. "Herself now." Clara drank the water slowly, every motion deliberate. She'd grown older in the span of days, her eyes too steady for someone so young. Marnie watched her a moment longer, then said, "You're welcome to rest here. But I've heard talk, bad talk. Riders passing through. Mean ones." "We're not far behind them," Boone said. Marnie's expression tightened. "Then you better do what you came to do quick, before they circle back." That night, Boone sat with Marnie on the porch, the desert cooling around them. Clara lay inside, though Boone doubted she was asleep. "I figured you were dead," Marnie said. "Last I heard, the Rangers were looking to hang you." "They almost did," Boone said. "What changed?" He looked to the stars. "Got tired of running. Started wanting to put things right, best I could." She studied him quietly. "This girl, she changed that. She reminded me what I used to be." Marnie nodded slowly. "You still got it in you, Boone?" He didn't answer. The next morning, the dust cloud appeared on the horizon, small at first, then growing, a smudge of brown against the pale blue sky. Boone didn't need to count the riders. He knew. 4, maybe 5. They moved with the arrogance of men who hadn't been stopped in years. He turned to Clara. "You stay here." "No." Boone crouched before her. "You don't have to see this." "I do," she said. "I need to see it end." Boone held her gaze. Then he nodded. They prepared quickly. Marnie handed Boone a shotgun and strapped her rifle across her back. Clara reloaded her revolver, her fingers shaking only slightly. The gang came in hard. 5 men, dust-coated and hungry-looking, their horses snorting and eyes wild. At the front rode a man with a red bandana and a silver tooth that flashed when he grinned. Boone stepped into the yard, shotgun low. "Afternoon, boys." The silver-toothed man tilted his head. "Ain't that a ghost?" "Could be." "You the one sniffing after us?" Boone shrugged. "You left a trail a blind man could follow." The man grinned wider. "And you think you'll end it here?" "I know I will." Behind him, Clara stepped out, revolver drawn. The men laughed. Boone didn't. You left one breathing, he said. Big mistake. The man's grin faltered. Boone fired first. The blast took one rider clean from his saddle. Chaos erupted. Marnie dropped a second man from the porch. Clara stood frozen a split second too long, then raised her revolver and fired. Missed. Fired again, hit one in the leg. The fourth man dismounted and ran for cover. Boone reloaded quick, spinning the barrel. A bullet grazed his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. He moved like he'd been waiting for this fight his whole life. The silver-toothed man drew and fired, his bullet clipping Boone's arm. Boone dropped to one knee and let off a round that sent the outlaw sprawling. The last rider, young, scared, turned and fled. Clara raised her revolver, finger trembling. Boone lowered her hand. He's done. The yard fell silent. Dust swirled. Boone turned to Clara. Her face was pale, but her eyes were fierce. You did good, he said. She looked at the bodies, then at him. Is that all of them? Boone nodded. That's the last of Hawthorne's men. The rest are scattered or dead. Marnie stepped forward, checking Boone's wound. Clean through. You'll live. Clara sat heavily on the porch step, staring at her hands. I thought I'd feel better. Boone sat beside her. You won't. Not for a while. Maybe not ever. But they're gone. They are. Clara didn't speak for a long time. When the sun dipped low again, she finally said, You were one of them once, weren't you? Boone didn't lie. I rode with worse. So why help me? He looked out over the land, eyes distant. Because someone helped me once, and I didn't deserve it either. She nodded slowly, the silence stretching between them like understanding. That night, Boone dug 5 graves. Clara helped, her hands blistered and raw. They didn't mark the mounds. Some men didn't earn names in death. When the last shovelful fell, Boone stood and looked to the stars. He wasn't running anymore, and Clara wasn't alone. The dawn broke slow and warm, gold spilling across the valley, like spilled paint. Clara stood on the porch, her boots dusted and her shoulders squared, watching the sun lift above the buttes. Her hair was pulled back now, tied with a scrap of leather Boone had cut from an old bridle. She looked older in the morning light, not just tired, but forged. Boone stepped out behind her, his arm still stiff from the wound, but wrapped clean. He carried 2 mugs, one of them trembling slightly from the pain he wouldn't speak about. He handed one to Clara. She took it without a word. They drank in silence. There was a comfort in it now, less the absence of speech, more the presence of understanding. No more need to circle around things. They'd seen too much of each other to pretend at anything simple. I buried the rifles, Clara said. Boone raised an eyebrow. I figured you wouldn't want them out where someone else could find them. He nodded. Smart. I kept one. Smarter. Down by the corral, Marnie was already at work, her movements crisp and practiced. She didn't talk much either, not since the fight, but the look she gave Clara whenever they crossed paths had changed. There was no longer pity in it, only recognition. Boone leaned against the post, sipping slow. You could stay, you know. Marnie take you on, teach you the ranch, teach you to shoot better. Clara didn't answer right away. She watched a hawk circle overhead, the rise and dip of its wings calm and certain. I might, she said, but not now. Boone waited. I've been thinking, she said finally, about the ones they never got to bury. The rest of the wagon train. My ma. My little brother. Other folks, too. They deserve more than to rot out there in the dirt. They do, Boone said. I want to find them. Mark where they fell. Say the names. Boone didn't try to talk her out of it. Didn't tell her it was dangerous or foolish. He only nodded. Then that's what we'll do. I didn't say I was done with you yet. She gave him a look, just the barest hint of a smile. Thought you might say that. They left Marnie's place 2 days later. Clara wore a new hat, a bit too big, and rode a mule with a sour temperament and a tendency to wander. Boone had restitched his saddle and packed light, just enough food, water, and ammunition to last a few weeks if they moved right. The trail back east was rougher than the one they'd come in on. No one had reason to use it anymore. But Boone found the markers, an old cottonwood split by lightning, a dry creek bed that still held the bones of cattle from some long-gone drought. The land remembered, even if people didn't. Clara kept a journal. Not much, just names and dates where she could remember them. For the others, she made marks in the dirt or piled stones. A simple thing, but it mattered. To her. To the wind. They found the wagon site on the 7th day. Time and scavengers had taken their toll. The wagons were burned down to skeletons. No canvas, no signs of life. Just scorched wood, sun-bleached bones, and silence. Clara didn't cry. She walked slowly through the wreckage, touching what was left of the wheel her brother used to spin with his foot. Boone stayed back, his hat low over his eyes. She buried them all. Or tried to. There were too many, and not enough of them left to move. So she did what she could. Gathered bones. Set stones. Whispered names like prayers. Boone helped wordless. They worked until the sun dipped and the shadows reached long across the valley floor. When it was done, they sat beneath a mesquite tree, sweat-soaked and dirt-covered. "That's all of them," she said, her voice thin. "You did right by them," Boone said. Clara nodded, but her gaze was fixed on the darkening horizon. What happens now? Boone thought about that. He'd spent years drifting from one town to the next, always looking over his shoulder, always expecting a reckoning. But now, the reckoning had come and gone and left him standing. "Now," he said, "we ride somewhere new. Make something better." "Where?" "Don't much matter, so long as the trail leads forward." Clara leaned back against the tree, arms folded behind her head. "You ever think about going back to who you were?" "Before." Boone gave a slow shake of his head. "Ain't no going back. But there's a way forward. One step at a time." She closed her eyes, the stars beginning to pierce the sky overhead. "Then I guess I'll follow." They spent a few more days there, building crude markers, fashioning crosses from branches, tying scraps of cloth around the ones they knew for sure. Clara carved her mother's name into a piece of bark and wedged it between stones. She sat beside it for hours, humming the old hymn her mother used to sing in the evenings. Boone gave her space. When they finally rode out, neither of them looked back. They passed through a small town 3 days later. Dusty buildings, a lopsided church, and a saloon that leaned like a drunk against a fence post. Boone bought supplies. Clara traded stories for bread and jam. The locals eyed them, suspicious at first, then respectful. Word had spread. Folks whispered about a girl with steel in her eyes and a man who rode with ghosts in his shadow. They moved on before nightfall. Boone didn't care for towns. Claire didn't either. By the time they crossed the river country, spring had begun to show its face. Green shoots pushing up from the hard earth, wildflowers blooming like scattered fire. Boone rode ahead, his frame looser now, less weighed down. Clara followed close, humming sometimes, lost in thought. One night, as the fire cracked low and the stars wheeled high, Clara turned to him. "Do you think we're good people?" Boone stared into the fire. "I think we're trying to be." "That enough?" He thought about that a long while. "It has to be." She nodded, satisfied. The firelight caught the edge of her jaw, set hard, determined. They didn't speak again that night. Months passed. They helped put out a barn fire in a settlement east of the Snake River. Boone broke a thief's arm in a border town and left a doctor's pay behind. Clara taught a boy in the mountains how to ride without falling, and he gave her a necklace made of bone and twine. They built something out of motion, a life stitched together by trail dust and silence, small victories and slow healing. One morning, Clara came back from the creek with fish in her hands and said, "I've been thinking about building something. A place. Somewhere we could stay." Boone looked at her. Really looked. "I reckon it's time," he said. So they found a patch of land near a bend in the river, where the soil was dark and the trees tall enough to offer shade. They built slow, with their own hands. A cabin, a fence, a life. No signs, no names, just the quiet knowledge that this, finally, was theirs. Boone taught her how to cut timber, how to thatch a roof that didn't leak. Clara planted rows of beans and corn. Sometimes they took in travelers, strangers, widows, kids too lean and wide-eyed. They didn't ask questions, just offered food, shelter, a clean blanket. Boone never carried a rifle in town again. Clara never left her revolver far behind. The past stayed with them, like a scar, but not a wound. One evening, Boone stood watching the horizon as the sun dipped low and the river caught fire with its reflection. Clara came up beside him, taller now, stronger. "Think the world's done needing people like us?" she asked. Boone smiled. "I think the world always needs people like us. It just don't always know it."